I have spent most of my life preparing to write this book. Luis Alberto Urrea wrote this line in the letter to readers that opens his latest novel, Good Night, Irene. If you've never heard of the Club Mobile Corps, an all-woman volunteer program of the Red Cross, affectionately referred to as the Donut Dollies, we learn all about them in the novel Good Night, Irene. And what a story it is. These volunteers, the women, had 2 months of training and then were sent out among the troops in 2-ton trucks equipped with coffee makers and donut machines, and not a little compassion to share. But they also faced harrowing experiences out there behind the front lines. This is Book Public from Texas Public Radio. I'm Yvette Benavides. Through his research, Luis Alberto Urrea discovers that his mother had been on the front lines, she and her truckmates. The Donut Dollies were recognized as the foremost women in battle in World War II and were among 250 elite Club Mobile women who accompanied the troops that pushed through France and Belgium and Germany after D-Day. Urrea's mother was assigned to Patton's Third Army and became trapped behind enemy lines in the Battle of the Bulge, and was there to help liberate Buchenwald. Urrea's mother did not speak about her time in the Red Cross, but the author's research and an incredible twist of fate that leads him to a 94-year-old donut dolly who worked with Urrea's mother helps him retrace the steps and write the story. The story in Good Night, Irene is a work of fiction, but as Urrea writes, sometimes the fable is the surest way to see the truth. And the interview you're about to hear illustrates this fact that Luis Alberto Urrea has spent most of his life preparing for this book. Urrea sits alongside his wife Cinderella during our conversation as he discusses his sometimes painful childhood, his mother's undiagnosed PTSD, how his solitude was a part of his writing life, in the same way that the support of women became the inspiration for so many of his books. Urrea's sometimes difficult relationship with his father leads to yet another part of the story. It's an unlikely piece of the puzzle, but as you'll hear, it makes perfect sense. An epigraph that opens the book is from the song lyrics of Irene by Joan Manuel Serrat, a beloved Spanish composer and singer whose music has been much admired by Mexicans for decades. In the song, Serrat sings, "No comprendo cómo puede usted pasar y no verla," or, "I don't understand how you can pass by and not see her." How has a story like this one not been told and retold of the compassion, valor, and selflessness of someone like Phyllis McLaughlin de Urrea? How did even she hide it away in a diary, in a box, in the secret compartment of a hollow doorknob, or in her own long forgetting? Luis Alberto Urrea helps us see. I talked to Luis Alberto Urrea about his novel, Good Night, Irene. I'm so excited about this book. I don't know, I have like all my emotions in my throat right now, and I can imagine that you do too about this book. And right now I have Serrat's Irene in my head because
Ay, qué bueno.
I've been listening to it on loop.
Isn't that song perfect? I don't
It
know why. The first time I heard it, it completely broke my heart when I was a kid. And I'm so glad you brought it up because nobody's brought it up. Nobody's mentioned it. I don't think they've even noticed it, which kind of makes my point, you know? No comprendo cómo puede usted pasar y no verla. You know, it's like, come on. The world is full of Irenes. Why aren't we paying attention?
Oh, that's so beautiful. I love Serrat to begin with, but to come
Me too.
across that epigraph in your book it was perfect.
Oh, I'm so glad. But
Yeah.
I just wanted, I wanted the raza to know I haven't forgotten, man. Still am Latino. I still care about Spanish, and that's why. Here's a little tip for you. You might appreciate the character in the second half, Zut Garcia. That vato showed up in my first novel, In Search of Snow. I've been waiting 30 years to tell that guy's story.
I was on a search for those little sorts of Easter eggs. It was very happy to come across good old piano playing Garcia. Love it. But
Yeah.
tell me first. Tell me about the first moment, like the first time you knew something in your head, in your mind, in your soul about this book, the seed of this book. When was that first moment?
It's a couple of things. You'll appreciate this, I think. I think other people haven't quite understood it when I've talked about it. But my mom was the only American in the family. Puros Mexicanos. Everybody from Sinaloa, Mexico City, or Tijuana, and me. And when I was a little boy, I had a Tijuana accent, whereas my mother was New York. Called me dear boy, Lucci, which I hated because the Mexicans thought it was hilarious. Ay, Lucci, Lucci. I wanted something more macho. So she was this outlier in our family and never really connected with her own family. So she lived in this isolation in Tijuana and then San Diego. That was part of it. Part of it was her nightmares, realizing later that she had PTSD because nobody knew what that was until much later. Part of it was her very stingy sharing of some war memories and me not quite getting it. I was a callow kid in Southern California, still wanting to be a famous writer. I always wanted to be Leonard Cohen. Well, okay, I wanted to be Steve McQueen first. Found out I wasn't going to do that. And then I wanted to be Robert Plant in Led Zeppelin. I couldn't do that. But the writer, it was always being a writer. So all of those things went into it. But the moment when the actual book presented itself to me was when we met Miss Jill, the model character for Dorothy in the novel. And we thought Miss Jill was dead, and she ended up living an hour and a half from our house, which that was astonishing. There were a lot of milagros all the way through this book. I almost felt my mom's hand in it. But we went down to meet her. She was 94, was about to turn 95. And when we went into her apartment, she had a framed portrait of my mother in her uniform on the wall. She'd been missing my mom since 1954. And my mom looked beautiful. She was 27 years old at the height of her powers, looking sort of up to the sky a little bit in her uniform. And Miss Jill said this. She said, I drove the truck, but your mother brought the joy. And I was just whiplashed. I thought, my mother brought the joy. And I had sort of constructed this semi-tragic and, your nutty mom thing. We're always like, hi, mom, mom, mom. Um, and I suddenly saw this young woman full of dreams and heroism going into this horrible thing. The book just came to life right there. It's like someone watered the seed, and here comes a little flower. It was great.
Well, late in the book, you write, she had arranged her world into a long forgetting.
Yeah.
And I thought about that's about the character, but I thought about how that sort of conflates life with your mother. You now know that she may have been living with an undiagnosed PTSD.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And that time was so difficult. And she didn't talk about it the way that veterans from World War I, World War II were not inclined to discuss those details and go
Oh,
back to
oh,
those memories.
absolutely. All wars, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan. I was just telling somebody this, but at the gym we go to, Cindy and I always go work out together. Miralos. Huh? But we
How
go to
lovely.
the gym, and there was a really lovely man there, youngest to me, because everybody's young to me now, but much younger than we were, maybe in his 40s. Lovely guy, realtor. We would talk about this book, and I told him, yeah, I'm finally going to be able to get Cindy the lake house she wants if I'm lucky. And he was, I'll help you. He was a veteran of the Middle Eastern wars, and he shot himself 3 weeks ago,
Oh my
out
God.
of the blue, just gone. And I think a lot of people are living with a lot of things that they don't know how to deal with. So that, that was kind of what was behind, I think, what you're asking, the
Mhm.
long forgetting. She was torn between forgetting and remembering, and I think that was really difficult for her. And so there's some little things that are in the novel that were real. For example, in the late parts of the novel, when we discover the antique doorknobs with photographs of people inside the doorknobs, that was my mom. That was my mom. After she died, the little round plaque I talk about in the doorknob had sprung off the doorknob. It's like a little shield held in by phalanges. It had popped out, and I was going to put it back in, and I looked inside the doorknob, and there's a photograph of a man. She'd clearly cut it out and tucked it in, black-haired man, and I knew immediately that she had put it there to protect her at night. Who was that guy? I don't know, though. Years later, at Miss Jill's house, when we were looking through Miss Jill's photo albums, she had pictures of my mom with a black-haired fighter pilot in Cannes on the beach.
Mhm.
And I would swear that the guy in the doorknob was that pilot. And that, that's amazing. There's just all these little
Yeah,
crisscrossing things.
it was Jake.
Jake. Yeah, Jake. The handyman.
Handy. Now, in your acknowledgments, you said this. Sometimes the fable is the surest way to see the truth.
Yeah.
And all of these stunning, true details are in this novel, in this work of fiction. Can you talk about the Club Mobile core, which is, again, one of these elements that is all too true, but that
Yes.
you bring to life for us in what is essentially a work of fiction with Irene Woodward and Dorothy Dunford and Ellie and all those third girls,
Yeah,
the donut
the
dollies.
circulating, the
Yeah.
third girl in the truck. We're taking the most of the book tour. This is ridiculous and insane, but we had to do it. Cindy and I are driving it. We bought a new SUV. Yeah, vamos, and we're calling it the Clubmobile Tour. And somebody just this morning said, "Hey, why don't you take on reporters and stuff as the third girl in the truck for a leg of it?" And I thought, wow.
That's
Except
a
we have
great.
too much fun by ourselves, but I would consider. Yeah, the details, the details that makes the story. You want it to have life, and so many of those details are lost because the women themselves are lost. To have such an amazing World War II story in an era that still seems to love World War II stories, but to not have these women even mentioned. Jill, she's 94, I think I told you when we met her,
Mhm.
was steaming mad that they had been forgotten. They'd been written out of or just ignored completely out of the story. She got so mad with all the Greatest Generation news coverages and the Band of Brothers and all that stuff. She wrote to Tom Brokaw, who was the great champion of World War II issues, and complained and said, "We were there, we were there." And he didn't answer. So she wrote again. And his secretary sent her a note and said, "That's very interesting. And if we
Uh,
find any space in one of the broadcasts, or we'll mention you." Never
uh,
did. And so she always called him that one with the hair. That one with the hair on television. He was mad. There were reasons for it, and part of it was that they weren't actually in the army; they were in the Red Cross, and people still to this day think Red Cross women were in the rear. And I've been complaining about this a little bit because the New York Times put out the column I wrote about her, and I didn't expect the response has been overwhelming. I mean, they cut off at 500 messages, but we're still getting messages. Women telling the stories of their moms and the silence or their own silence or how grandpa didn't talk over and over and over again. But sure enough, mansplainer or two got in touch with me to let me know that that's exaggerated. In fact, I was exaggerating the record. The reality was these women wouldn't have even heard a weapon. And I thought, well, thanks for making my point. He'd seen movies, read all the books. They're not mentioned in any of the books. And I wanted to say, if Jill were still alive, she would have something to say to you about this.
Yeah.
She was even mad at Stephen Ambrose. Everybody. She was like, where are we? Where are we in the history? And she's fought for that. She corresponded with people in Congress, and they did get a citation for being the most forward women in combat. That's from the US government. So, she felt a little vindicated, but still forgot.
Well, your research, Luis, I mean, so that like this again is a way to tamp down some of the, some of the mansplaining and some of these sayers. Your research, I mean, as you describe it and as it is so obvious in this book, and even just what we know about Jill. And I also have followed you on social media for so long, so I was following along some of that too.
Oh,
Um, there was a lot of insight too about your research over the last few years, even.
yeah.
So I want to ask you about that. It sounds like you and Cindy traveled, and also Chayo, your daughter traveled all over the place, and
Yeah.
it wasn't just about sort of setting foot on going into a country where your mother traveled, or where the Red Cross, or where these donut dollies might have been, but just to really be in these spaces, but also the documentation and just an astounding amount of research. I feel like it really, really shows up on these pages of your novel.
Thank you. Thank you. You're doing it for your mama, so you better do a good job.
Yeah.
Um, I just honestly, I'm answering your question, but I just want to put this on the record that I'm so tired of those he-men doing he-men stuff, man, and saving the world. And the reality is that our moms are the heroes, not us. Our grandmothers are the heroes. Our sisters are the heroes. Our girlfriends, and I don't mean romantic, but those girls that
Mhm.
took us under their wing when we were boys and hopeless and scared. And that's what happened to me. All the girls I knew saw me as the writer. It's probably why I'm writing still today. Our daughters, they're the heroes. And you guys allow us to, walk around crowing like roosters, and you wait till we get done and then go back to running the world, man. That's how I grew up. So it was very important to me to try to understand as completely as possible um, what the experience had been. And that even included going back to New York to see where my mother was actually from. And it's interesting to me because our first research trip to New York was to work on the sequel to The Hummingbird's Daughter. It didn't even
Mm.
occur to me to look up my mom, but Teresita lived on a specific street in Manhattan for a while, and we went there, and her house was still there, but it's now a Kinko's. But the original front door and the original front door across the street is still there. And I thought, Teresita looked at this door every day.
Wow.
So that little bit of experience started resonating with my mother hard when I realized what I was starting to do. And so, she spent a girlhood in Staten Island. And to hear my mother talk, Staten Island was this emerald isle, this mystical, island of haute couture and Yankee brilliance and literacy and all this. And so, and we went and we took the ferry across, and I was looking the harbor, and there's the Statue of Liberty, and I see my mom in my mind at 13 years old going to the city and thinking yes. And then we get to Staten Island, and it sure wasn't what what she said it was. I always tell people got some really good pizza and bagels there, but we went to the part of Staten Island she was from, which was Richmond Village, the revolutionary remnants in the hills. And suddenly I'm standing on my mom's street, and I'm looking at the condo that has replaced her childhood home. But there something I couldn't have imagined, right? And I always wondered why, if she was Episcopalian, why did she love Catholicism so much and wanted me to be a priest and put me in Catholic school and loved the nuns and blah, blah, blah. Well, the church at the end of her block is a Catholic church. And the grade school she went to is across the street, and it's a Catholic school. She was taught by nuns. You're seeing your mother for the first time. I have a piece coming out on Memorial Day in Time, their website, about this very thing, meeting my mother. And I had Chayo, our daughter, Rosario Teresa, named after my godmother, Mama Chayo, and Teresita, the hummingbird's daughter. So, she's already a literary little creature. But we're walking around looking at all this stuff. The revolutionary homes my mom knew were still there. And I knew that she used to take a book and walk down the hill through the forest. There's a trail down to the creek, the streams that are running at the bottom of this little valley, and that there are little waterfalls. And we started down. Chayo was in front, and I'm watching her, and I see her putting her hand on the oak tree trunks to steady herself, and the old, literally ancient now, split rail fences are still there, and see her grab the railing as she goes down this hill. And it hit me. My mother probably took this exact walk. They were the same size, 5'3". And that my mother touched that tree. I know it. My mother. And when we got down, there's a road now, and Chayo crossed the road, went right to the stream, and found this flat stone and sat there looking meditative. And I thought, oh my God, I just knew in my gut, this is where my mom went to sit and read Emily Dickinson or whatever, Dickens. And there's Chayo. And I knew if Chayo had had a book, she probably would have started reading and wouldn't even notice us anymore. Those little things are where those details are where it starts to come out. And this last summer, the one part we hadn't gotten to, because we'd gone all over Europe for a couple of years. But COVID, the lockdown stopped us from finishing our work in England. And so we went to England again once we could. And we went to find the village of Glatton, where she had been stationed at the air base I talk about, the B-17 base. And here's the thing, I know you're gonna understand this. I have my mother's pictures of Glatton, and she was living in this thatched roofed house on the second story with Jill and the third girl in the truck. And on the ground floor, John Ford's film crew were living. These guys, cameramen, because they were making a documentary. And so there was a constant party going on in this house. Okay. And we have a picture of my mother looking like a movie star at the window of this. Oh, here are my dogs. Oh, they're all excited. So she's upstairs looking out the window up at the sky. And I knew, because she had told me, that when they weren't working at the bomber base, they would watch the formations fly overhead. Wow. So she's looking up there. I have Chayo with me, and I point, because she's of course never met her grandmother. Her grandmother died long before she was born. And I said, there's your grandmother's window. I have pictures of her looking out this window. And across the street, there was a writer, an English writer that my mother worshipped. It's a little street, and she was catty corner from his house, Beverly Nichols. Wow. And it's there. We have the picture and then the house right there. So we took her over there, and I said, this is where your grandmother hung out. And to have all that history right there, still. And this being England, it was also a little bit Monty Python, because we're standing in front of the house, and our hosts are taking pictures of us posing there, right? And we didn't see that there's an Englishman inside the house looking out the window at us. And he popped out. He said, "Hello, what's going on here?" He said, "Oh, my mother lived over in Mrs. Cobble's house across the street, and she used to come here because of Mr. Nichols." And he said, "Oh, well then, you'd better come in and look around." And off we go. It's, my daughter's thinking Dad lives some kind of weird enchanted life or something. And
Oh my God.
we sat in his lobby, we looked at their gardens, and then we went down to the air base. And this is again where you realize how unfair the experience of these women was. They were on that base. They lived in town. They would ride bikes 3 miles to the base, work, and 3 miles back on bicycles. Um, Both American and the English women in their buses parked on the base doing all this stuff, and the people who curate it had no idea they'd ever been there.
Wow.
And they were astonished. And a whole new piece of history. They didn't have a single picture of them. I have pictures of them there on the base with their truck. They didn't. um, and the guy who manages the airfield asked us, "Would you like to walk the runway? It's still there." And of course, we said yes. And so Chayo and I joined him walking down the runway. And it's got, all the numbers and the arrows pointing the direction for the planes to go. All this stuff, it was haunting, silent, huge wheat fields with English forests at the end. And he stopped us and he walked off the runway into the tall grasses, and he was puttering around, and he came back with a triangular chunk of tarmac. I keep it on my desk. And he handed it to me and he said, "You'd better take this." He said, "Because your mom might have stood on it."
Oh gosh.
Good Lord. So it wasn't really research so much as just experience. Mom is washing over you like a wave. And then back home, Miss Jill is there to hear about it, and it would set off her memories.
I just love this story. And I'm thinking about John Clare now too, which is I think a poet I'm always going to associate with your mom and Goodnight Irene. Um,
That's great because I love John Clare, and out of the blue, Chayo said, "Dad, have you heard of John Clare, the poet?" I said, "Yes, I love that guy." And I thought, how cool is that? So I had to sneak him in.
I love this. I I love the way that your daughter is involved in this or has been involved in this, but
Yeah.
also, of course, the beautifully ubiquitous Cinderella. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about Cinderella.
Ay, la Cinderella, pues, hombre. Um, Interestingly enough, Cinderella ended up being the only American in the Mexican family. When we got married, all of the Urreas in San Diego, they were like, oh, and in Sinaloa too, they're like, "Oh, la Cindy, mira la Cindy." And I had this great cultural experience with the fam that, when she first came in, they of course loved her to death, but she was kind of a slightly alien creature to the fam because they're really old school Mexicanos, except the young who are they're vatos y rucas. And so they have us to dinner, and we're having this big dinner, and I have a big rough and tough nephew who's done, and they were all amazed. They're like, "Yeah, Cinderella, nomás, la Cenicienta se llama de Cinderella, qué bárbaro." And the guy's over there, he doesn't speak Spanish, he's just Chicano, and he's just sitting there and he's waiting, and he leans over and he goes, "Hey, Tia Snow White, pass me the potatoes." And they're all yelling at him, "Oye, menso, no es Snow White, es Cinderella." And he says, "So what? It's a fairy tale. She's white." And it was like that all the time. One of my brothers, he and his wife decided to make us Thanksgiving dinner. They'd never cooked a Thanksgiving dinner, and they invited us over for it. And we were sitting at the table, and there's some turkey, and I know this is not true, but I swear I think it is. But there may be some enchiladas with it. But anyway, turkey. And she came out with a pitcher full of what we thought was cream and started pouring the cream all over the turkey. And I said, "Is that crema or what?" And she said, Luis, it's the mashed potatoes. So that was her trial by fire entering the
Oh,
family. You know, Cindy is a journalist. She's a veteran of Gannett, or a survivor of Gannett. You know, she was 20 some years in Gannett. Um, you'll appreciate this. We uh, we were a bit of a journalism scandal, because you know, I came to Tucson working on Hummingbird's daughter, and they sent her to interview me. We ended up married, so that was a good thing. And we do everything together. We travel together. I've tried to actually, believe it or not, talk her into sharing a byline sometime, but she won't do it. She always says, I'm logistics. I say, stop that. I mean, you know, every single thing I write, sooner or later, we sit up all night in bed talking about. And sometimes, because you've read my stuff, you'll know this, that sometimes it's some really painful. And, you know, and Cindy, being a reporter, is a much better typist than I am. So sometimes she'll come along and push me out of the way and start typing and just say, just dictate. And I wander around crying and saying these painful
oh.
things. She, you know, but we've always had a partnership, and we do everything together because we found each other later, you know, and we both had unsuccessful first marriages, and now we don't have that, and we have a beautiful family, and you know, and we're happy to do this, and we travel together all the time, and I do every possible public event, no matter where it is, we do together. And you know, I'll buy the extra ticket for her because we just consider it, you know, our 57th second honeymoon, if you know what I mean.
I love
We
it.
get to go everywhere. And that's great. Is, you know, we always have a companion. We always, you know, we garden together. We watch trash TV. We were just watching trash TV that we missed while we were on the road this last week.
I love it. I love hearing this about how our mothers and our sisters and our girlfriends are
Yeah,
the heroes, and knowing how Cinderella is so involved in these processes, that she's the one who, had to read the diary entries to you because it was such an emotional thing for you. Or she's the one who gets on Google and finds out that Miss Jill is just 90 minutes away from your house. I mean, these kinds of details I just eat up with a spoon. I just love this partnership, and it gets me to thinking about how your stories are about women, you know,
yeah,
Into the Beautiful North, the Hummingbirds. I mean, these are stories about women. And um, there's a character in this novel, I won't give it all away, but that says, aging is a kind of a war for us too. And
yeah,
I think about what it means um, for all of us to have a book like this, to learn about these women from another time, and
yeah,
yet look at look at how sort of timeless their strength is, and their sort of sense of survival is, and their way of loving is just for all time. And I don't know, I just love knowing that you had this story about your mother and Miss Jill, and then Cinderella is there in the mix too. And I just love that whole thing.
thank you. Me too, honestly. I have to tell you that I have a mixed relationship with my gender because, you know, sometimes guys, I just want to put my arm around them and say, you know, you got to cut the crap, bro, because you're being really stupid. You know, you're being really stupid. And um I just don't. I was raised by women. My dad was sort of absent. Muy Mexicano. He didn't approve of me sometimes. He thought I was weird, you know, that whatever. But imagine this. So there's my mom, you know, she has me for whatever reason in Tijuana, married to my dad, and we lived on this dirt street in Colonia Independencia. Rampa Independencia 1002. I remember it still. My cousin Hugo lives there. Um, and there's my mom, my grandma, Mama Lupita, my tia Leti, La Flaca, my tia Irma, Mexico's national bowling champion. And unbeknownst to everybody in the family, the first out lesbiana in the whole family who ended up having a wife, for God's sake, like in the 60s. And the familia saying, isn't it nice that the girls take care of each other until they find husbands? And all of us, the young generation, was like, no, it's not really like that at all. They love each other. But puras mujeres. And my cousin Margo, who suffered horrible things, and I don't even have to extrapolate. You all know what I'm saying, at the hands of the men in the family. And she was magical. I don't, my first touch of magical realism came from Margarita, this mishandled young girl. She was about maybe 5 years older than me. But she, honest to God, and this isn't just a Garcia Marquez thing, she could summon birds out of the sky. I don't know what that was about. Era bruja. She'd put up her finger and a bird would come and land on it. How could you not love that? And then when we moved out of Tijuana, I there was tuberculosis. I had tuberculosis. I tell this to people because my parents told me, don't ever tell anybody ever you had tuberculosis. So I tell everybody, yeah, I had tuberculosis. Because this shame, there's enough shame to go around. Wasn't anybody's fault. I just had it. It was a rough place. So we got to San Diego, and then I had godparents because nobody else could take care of me because they thought I'd kill their family with tuberculosis. And the Garcia family, Mama Chayo, now you know where Chayo's name came from, and her family, full house of women. Abelino was the man, el gallo de la casa. He was the one who bellowed about life and stuff, and they just patiently waited for him to go to work. And then women got back to running the world. Mama Chayo, her two daughters, Kela and Fina, my first girlfriends, they were maybe 13 years older than me. I was smitten with both of them. I spent all my days with them. And then La Nina, we don't have that anymore. Nina, I've joked about this before in lectures, but Nina was 90 years old, when I was born, and was 90 years old 20 years later. She never, just, what now in cultural studies and in mythology they call the crone, the old fountain of female wisdom. And she was the most magnificent. She had, I don't see those anymore, but these big blocky black old lady shoes we always, and she had a baston, and she had a little goatee of white hair. And and she was the depository of all history. And she had a little sewing room with a little bed, and that's where I'd sleep at night when I stayed with him. And I would sit at her feet as she crocheted, and she would tell me stories, and very slowly she'd fall asleep, and I'd watch her snore. I'd watch her little whiskers. That's how I grew up. And all the way through moving to Claremont, this white suburb, my mom was much happier, but I felt lost, and I didn't have money. I had a Tijuana accent still. I was talking a little bit like this. And the Boy Scouts of all people started calling me Greaser Wetback. And I realized suddenly, if I was going to survive, I better switch closer to my mom right now and speak like she did, because I was a freak, and I didn't want to be a freak. So I went into junior high school feeling completely lost, and couldn't dance. I All that stuff. I was a nerd reader. The guys were kind of weird. They, even at that time, they were saying such stupid things about the girls. I was like, you're talking about my people, man. What are you talking about? And the girls closed around me. I'm getting a little emotional, but they closed around me, and they they were my friends. And when we got to high school, they were calling themselves my harem, which I thought was hilarious. I didn't have a girlfriend, but I had a harem, man. And they read my poetry, and then we would talk all night on the phone, and there I would play them quietly. You remember the phones with the long coiled cord? I would take the wall phone off of the kitchen wall and stretch it into my bedroom and play Leonard Cohen really quietly and listen to them weep. Oh, oh, Louis. Oh, I say, I know. But that's who I like to be with. And it's God's little joke that no matter where I go, I always tell this to Cindy because there are always these weird killer males that show up and they're dedicated to protecting us all. Right now, I've got a border patrol agent that just loves me to death, and he's always ready to go to combat. Anything you need, bro. But thanks, bro. So I do the bro thing too. I like car chases and detective books and all that stuff. But yeah, I've always felt so close to women, and I am so grateful for them forgiving me for the sins of malehood, Um, and since we've talked about Chayo, I think you'll appreciate this. She got feminist really early, and was really serious about it. And she told me one day, Dad, I've decided that there has to be an island somewhere where all you men can be put, and then we'll run the world the way it should be. And I said, well, okay, but I can stay, right? And she looked at me, she said, yeah, I'll have to think about that. Which I just loved. So I just like being in partnership. I like being safe with each other. Just, but I feel that way across the board. You know, I don't understand racial hatred. I don't understand gay bashing. I don't understand transphobia. Who cares if if you don't believe in gay marriage, then don't marry somebody who's gay. Leave them alone. Leave people alone. So that's, if you want to know my theology and my politics, it's that don't raise your hand to anybody unless you're just saying hello, have a fabulous day, I see you, I'm your friend, bye. you know I don't, and that comes from being around a lot of tension, a lot of racial strife, lots of violence in the barrio. I didn't like it, so ahí está.
So, Luis, I wonder if people have said to you that the Goodnight Irene is a departure, just in terms of what some of your readers know you for. Writing about the US-Mexico border, writing about characters like the ones in like House of Broken Angels most recently. I mean, I just, Zoot Garcia notwithstanding, right? I discern that that this novel is also that this is also as maybe based on everything we've talked about today, that this novel it was inevitable. This was an inevitable story from Luis Alberto Urrea. Am I wrong about that? Am I right about that?
You're right about everything, sister. No, no, I think you're right. It had to happen. And I have, honestly, I haven't even talked about this. Is it. This is your exclusive, but I have spent my entire life trying to represent my father. And partially this is because, when I was 21 years old, was he died at the hands of Mexican cops. The thing he loved the most, Mexico. And I'd been the first to go to college. Era muy mexicano, all right? He had kids, if you know what I mean, familias. But I was the only one between him and my mother. And so I was going to college, and he was not thrilled with what I was doing. He wanted me to be a lawyer or an accountant, and when we had the meeting, they had already gotten separated, but we sat down together having coffee, and my dad said, Luis, ¿qué vas a estudiar, pues? What are you going to study? And I said, oh, Dad, yeah, I know what I'm going to study. I'm going to be an actor. And the look on his face was like, okay, anything else? And I said, yeah, I'm going to write poems. And he was like, oh my God. But he still wanted to celebrate it. And he drove back to Rosario, Sinaloa, our foundational town, 27 hours to get money from his bank account. Got $1,000 to bring back to be his first graduation gift. And he was south of Yuma and ran afoul of some crooked police, and horrible things happened. But his injuries made him, and he would be really angry that I tell you this, but made him wet himself and bleed. And so they didn't know that there was money in his pocket because they wouldn't put their hand in the pocket. And they left him at the police station to die. He apparently struggled for 8 hours. And Hugo, aforementioned Hugo, someone did call him in Tijuana, and he drove 300 miles in his truck to my dad. And he basically told him, you can die now. And he held him as my father died. And Hugo found the still wet cash. He knew because my dad had told him what he was doing. So I went to the funeral home in Tijuana. He called me and said, you've got to get to the funeral home in Tijuana. I got a ride with Margarita and Tia Flaca, and they took me down to Tijuana from San Diego. And Hugo met me, and he handed me the money. And he said, you know why it's stamped, right? And I said, I was 21 years old. I said, I can figure out, yeah. And the police showed up, and they had brought my father in a station wagon from San Luis. Ironic, isn't it? He died in San Luis. And I went out with Hugo. I just shook their hand like an idiot because I didn't understand. And I thanked them for bringing him. I told them it was very kind, and they just looked at me, and the cop said, well, that's good. That's good. But before we leave, you have to pay the fines. And I said, what fines? And they said, well, he's still under arrest, so you need to pay bail. And I said, wait, he's dead. And the cop was like, oh, está bien. If you don't want to pay bail, I'll take him back. We'll do whatever we want to with him if you don't want to pay. And I said, how much do you need? And they said, $750. I had 1,000. So I peeled off the 750, and they pocketed it and just walked away. And at that moment, the undertaker, the guy who ran the funeral home, came out. He was watching all this, and he said, oye, joven, I've got to tell you, this isn't a ministry, this is a business, and you have to pay for the funeral. And I'm just looking at Hugo, like, what? And I said, how much is that? He said, $800. And I had some money left from the previous. So Hugo and I went to all the relatives, all the siblings, everybody, and scraped it all together and paid it. And my dad, I hate to admit, was buried in an unmarked grave on a hillside in Tijuana. So you can imagine this stuff and other things. There's all kinds of other stuff. Some of it got into House of Broken Angels, but I was kind of lost. I was kind of broken, and I think writing was the only solution. So much so that I didn't know how to process what had happened to my father and to me. I didn't know it had happened to me. And I wrote a story about it, not knowing what else to do. And I mentioned to you, I was discovered by Ursula Le Guin. That's how. She came as a visiting workshop leader at my college. And the professor gave her the story. And at that point, she took me under her wing and said, you've got to, I want to buy it. I want to publish it. And she did. And she took over my writing life, thank God, because I was floundering. Like everything, I was improvising as I was going, not knowing what to do. Um, and she gave me a lot of the guidance I needed, up to and including bringing Toni Morrison to campus. I thought, holy God, what's happening to me? And telling me, Luisito, it's time for you to be a feminist. I said, well, okay. So, all of that, uh, to me, this story is one of a piece, but I was so compelled to represent my dad. And I was so compelled with all the racial stuff that we've all gone through to represent the fam and to represent Tijuana and then to represent just the borderlands. And, you know, it turned into a crusade, but all the time trying to figure out my poor mother. So I don't think, partially I think writing this novel was a way to find her, to understand her, and to realize that once she was this 27-year-old idealistic dreamer that everybody was in love with, I thought, I need to go back in time and shelter her a little bit, if that makes any sense. And all of the stuff up till now, I think, was for this book. I think this is the best book I can write. And I'm going back to form in a certain sense. My next novel is called The Zebras of Tijuana, but it's a fanciful book about how the painted donkeys happen in Tijuana. Why are donkeys painted like zebras in Tijuana? Um, and I know it's a response to the swan dive into overwhelming stuff in this book. I often, after too much has happened in books, take a break. So I did Devil's Highway, followed by Hummingbird's Daughter, which took 25 years to write. And I thought, to hell with this, I'm going to write Into the Beautiful North and have a vacation. So I have to have fun too, and this is a fun book. So yeah, I feel like Witness probably has been my abiding interest once I knew what I was doing. And as just a footnote, which you may find revelatory, I'm sure you know it, but after my dad's death, um, and the insurance company refused to pay because they said that he was injured in a car crash. They forced him off a cliff. Um, they wouldn't pay his insurance because the death certificate said he died of a stroke in a hospital. So Mexican, right?
Mm.
But after that, I was searching for meaning, and I joined a relief crew in Tijuana, attending to the poor. Uh,
Wow.
so the guy that was my boss, one of my mentors, and believe this, you're not going to believe this, but it's got something to do with all of this. I was my drama major, my published writer, all that stuff, and he was a grizzled war veteran,
Hmm.
and I think he himself was dealing with horrors from the Korean War and had decided to take care of thousands of children instead. And I went to work with him, and the first thing he did, he took me to the Tijuana garbage dump to attend to hundreds and hundreds of garbage pickers. And I can assure you that I'd never been in the Tijuana garbage dump. Most people in Tijuana, that's a different world for them. And he put out an aluminum tub, filled it with hot water, and put a bar of ivory soap. And he said, that's in there because it floats. And believe me, you'll thank me later. I thought, okay. And they said, are you humble enough to wash feet? And I said, yeah, sure. I thought, what is this guy, Jesus or what? And I knelt in the garbage, and he sent 150 people to me in a line.
Oh my gosh.
It's 300 feet, man. And by the end of it, I was crying. I wasn't feeling noble. I wasn't feeling disgusted. the love with which those people gave me their feet, the trust. Ay, güerito, and they'd hug me, and I was crying like a baby. So sometimes these days, I know it sounds pretentious, but just now, people have been writing to me just from these appearances that are starting. Oh, the price of fame. And I always tell them, I am not being famous. I'm washing feet. Don't you get it? I'm trying so hard to not make this you know, the Luis show. I'm trying to I'm trying to make things a little bit better, I guess. That may sound pretentious, but it's honestly what I feel.
But it makes me think about your mom. It makes me think about your mom and Miss Jill. It makes me think about Irene and Dorothy,
Yeah.
Ellie and the third girls in the novel in this massive truck, which was like, a house on wheels with the coffee urns and the burners
Yeah.
and the donut machine
And a
and
record player.
the record
They got to be DJs for the boys.
and the faces and all the faces and all the men and all the a kind of ministering, right? I mean,
It
exactly
was.
what you're describing with washing these feet and helping these people and not feeling noble and feeling very emotional. It,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about your mom and I'm thinking about Irene.
Yeah. There there's that moment in the book where they Irene forces Dorothy to pull over and do service, and the other two, they don't want to. They're like, "Oh, come on, Irene, really? No, no, no. The boys need us." And when Irene sees the soldier sitting on the back steps of the truck, and she's looking at how skinny his neck is, and he's got jug ears, and she suddenly finds her hand going to him, and she can't quite touch him, and pulls back. That to me is the thing. It's not romance, it's not adventure, it's not sex, it's human touch. And I think that you know they couldn't stop. Some women just were gone right away. They're like, I'm done with this.
Mhm.
But those women who ended up going through to the end or as far as they could, it was something inexplicable, and I don't know that they could define it even later in life. I will tell you that the book is funny. I hope everybody doesn't think, oh my God, this is like
It is
suffering through the
funny.
worst parts of the Old Testament or something. It's not,
No,
because they were hilarious. But
they were.
um, dig this. I know you're gonna love this because we've been laughing about it since we realized this here in the house. So my mom and my dad married. He moves to San Diego with her, and what job does he get? Driving a donut truck, a bakery truck delivering donuts. I could never figure out why my mother thought this was so hilarious. She didn't say anything about it. She would just laugh. His name was Alberto. She'd call him Alberto. Oh, Alberto. It's so amusing. And be like, what's so funny about our freaking donut? It was to her just this amazing punchline. Then when we moved out of the barrio, we're living up in the suburbs. My first paying job was cooking donuts. And she was beside herself. She thought it was the funniest, but she kept that little joke secret. But boy, she got mileage out of it. And she would tell me, "Say, dear boy, could you cook me up a little box of plain donuts, please?" Now I know why. So
Oh,
those memories, traumatizing too, but also I think cherished. And maybe they were so sacred to them that they also didn't maybe think we deserved to know. You know what I mean?
mhm.
There may be some of that. It may not all be trauma. It just may be this is my most precious and alive and awful at the same time era of my life.
Luis Alberto Urrea, thank you so much. What an honor to get to talk to you about Goodnight, Irene.
Oh
Thank you so
gosh,
much.
thank you. This was so much fun.
And I'll see you in September. I know you're going to be in San Antonio in September.
Oh, really? Oh, let's hang out. This will be so
Okay.
good. Yeah, we'll have to pick you up in the SUV. You'd be the third girl in the truck. We'll go right
Okay. That sounds
get some
good.
donuts. We'll go get donuts. All right.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you.
Thank you again. Hasta
Take care.
luego.
Hasta luego. Bye. Luis Alberto Urrea is the author of Good Night, Irene. He was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for his landmark work of nonfiction, The Devil's Highway. He's the author of numerous works, including The Hummingbird's Daughter and The House of Broken Angels, which was a National Book Critics Circle Award finalist. Good Night, Irene is published by Little Brown. This has been Book Public from Texas Public Radio. Write to us at bookpublic@tpr.org. Jacob Rosati composed our theme music. Dan Katz is Texas Public Radio's news director. I'm Yvette Benavides.